Hey, it's Kevin here. I bought this here international truck at an auction the other day. She ain't purty, but that's exactly why I decided to go bid on it. As you can see, it's got moss or something growing all over it. A few cracks in the hood. That's just plastic. I can fix that with fiberglass. Entry is buried up to the rims in sand. So I decided, well, that's a truck I'm going to go bid on. I knew the auctioneer, the auction company, and I knew what kind of people normally go to their auctions. I figured somebody see this pathetic looking old truck, they wouldn't be interested in it. So anyways, I got it for $225. She's pretty much complete. She's got a DT466 Diesel engine and I think it's a 6+1 transmission. It's missing the air cleaner for the air compressor, but it works. I had her running in about a half hour. She was last tagged in 2000. So she's been 18 or 19 years pretty much sitting. But the owner of the truck said it did start and they had moved it from time to time. But in the process of starting her and messing with her, because it was cold out them days, I had to prime it and had to deal with cold weather, which told me I should make a video on cold weather starting of a diesel engine. So here we go. So let's first talk about how you prime a good old-fashioned diesel engine. Now this don't necessarily apply to modern day diesels that use common rails or electronic fuel injection because they're set up totally different. The way these trucks work is this is an injection pump down here. Got the 6 lines coming off it to go to all the different cylinders. Right here is where the line hooks the top of the head. It goes into an injector which is inside the cylinder. Well, inside the combustion chamber. So the pump creates pressure through these lines. There's a spring inside that injector, which you can't really see the injector, you just see the nut going to it. There's a spring in there and a ball. When the pressure from the pump exceeds the spring pressure, the ball pops open. It's called popping, and it lets a mist of diesel fuel squirt into the combustion chamber. Now keep in mind that fluids do not compress. Diesel's a fluid. It does not compress. Air, on the other hand, compresses. You confine it to a container and you push on it. You can compress that air, and as you push it, you know, the piston or whatever you're pushing on will go down further. Inside here are a bunch of little pistons, and they don't stroke but a little teeny bit. So if there's air in there, all it's doing is compressing air, and then when a piston goes back down, you know, the air pushes it back down. So it just goes back and forth, and you're not getting fluid pumping through. So you got to remove the air from the system. The way you do that is by, again, on top of these, on top of the head where the lines go into the injectors, you crack open that nut. In this case, it's a 3/4 inch nut. All you got to do is turn it about a quarter turn, maybe half a turn. The more then that you crack, because there's 6 of them on this particular case, the more of them that you crack open, the quicker it'll bleed. I'm pretty lazy, so I usually just crack about 3 of them open. These are just ones to get to. Okay, on the pump, in this case right here, is a hand pump. You spin that down, spin that back, and you can pump on it, and that pumps fluid. In this case, it pumps fluid from, there's 2 filters down here. It sucks it from through the first filter, then through the pump, and it pushes it through the second filter into the injection pump. The first pump is the transfer pump or hand pump. So you want to crack open a line that's coming off of the pump, through the filter, as close as you can to the injection pump, if not at the injection pump. And you want to pump the hand pump until you get a good stream of fluid coming out. Now sometimes you'll get a good stream of fluid coming out, but you just pump fluid from the first filter and you still got more air behind it. So you may wind up starting it for a second, stalling it, and having to pump it all over again. The whole idea is to get from the tank all the way through the injection pump, no air in the system. You use a hand pump to bleed the filters all the way to the injection pump. And once you do that, you close the line, crack open the lines on top of the head, and then you turn the key and you crank the engine until you got fluid squirting out where the nuts are backed off. When you do that, shut the nuts off, and chances are it'll start. In most cases, if a diesel engine does not start right away, like rum, you still got air somewhere. But a diesel should crank up and fire real quick. And second, if you come up with an engine that's has used ether to try to start and they still couldn't get to start, evidence is ether cans laying around. That doesn't mean the engine's bad. You know, my God, I have no compression, I got to rebuild the engine. I don't know how many times I've heard that in the wintertime. Take the air cleaner off, go to the intake manifold, and take a squirt bottle with automatic transmission fluid and squirt into the intake as someone's cranking the engine over. This will suck the ATF into the combustion chambers, and it will lubricate the walls of the cylinders and hopefully create compression and start the engine. Because what's happened is that ether, starting fluid, has washed down the cylinder walls to where the rings have lost their seat. There's usually a thin layer of film on the cylinder walls, and the ether will wash that away and you'll lose compression. So anyway, squirting the ATF into the intake while you're cranking will replace that oil and allow the engine to start. She probably will smoke like a freight train when she starts, but let her clear up and don't freak out. Probably one reason why they wound up using the ether in the first place is because it was cold outside, the battery was weak, and the engine turned over slow and didn't create enough compression, not enough heat. So when they squirt the fuel in the combustion chamber, it did nothing. So what you need to know there is that diesel engine needs like 300 or 350 RPMs to create enough compression to heat the air up enough that it'll burn the diesel. So if the engine's throwing over like chances are it's not going to start. It needs to spin over good and strong. So don't jack with trying to start a diesel engine that's spinning over slow. Next thing, while we're talking about slow spinning diesel engines, there's two things that can happen. One thing that has two different causes, and that is you let off the key switch and the engine continues to crank. When that happens, you need to jump out of the truck. You need to disconnect the wire at the battery. Be careful about creating a spark when you pull it off, because if the battery's gassing, it could blow up on you. But if you don't disconnect that wire soon enough or quick enough, that low voltage is going to burn your starter up. Now you're going to be laying underneath the truck replacing a starter. So let's talk about what just happened when the engine kept cranking. There's two things that could happen. First thing is, when you turn the key switch, it energizes a little solenoid which pulls a plunger back. That plunger does two things. It engages a little gear into the starter ring gear. Second, it puts a copper contact against two lugs, which sends voltage down to the main windings to cause it to spin. So it engages the gear and it sends electric down to the main windings and cause it to spin. Low voltage can very easily cause the contacts to weld together, and then they won't pull back. And it seems how the contacts are weld together, it's got the plunger pulled back and the gear remains intact with the ring gear. And the second thing that can happen is a lot of times when your engine's spinning over slow, it causes the ring gear and the gear on the starter will kind of hang with each other. When you let off the key switch and voltage is taken off the coil, you know, the solenoid that pulls it back, the gears are physically in a bind, and they'll just sit there and continue to crank until you remove electricity from the starter by unhooking the battery. So if you unhook the battery, it's going to stop spinning. if you touch the negative or whatever wire back to the battery, if nothing happens, then it was mechanically hung. If it starts to spin again, then it is contacts are welded together. That's some important thing to know about dealing with the diesel in cold weather. So on mine, since mine was doing that, it got me thinking about giving you all this little story. I went ahead, I hooked up this battery disconnect. That way I'm not drawing an arc here. And that way if it does hang up, I can unhook it really fast. This is not permanent, but I will permanently attach this to the truck somewhere. So in the future, if that ever does happen, I can disconnect it. Yep. But anyways, this is my little gem for $225. She needs to be cleaned up. She's been sitting around forever. But she's got a nice little diesel engine. She runs good. She's been sitting. Let me see if she'll crank. But I ain't got my disconnect on. In the meantime, I'll go to auctions and I'll try to find me a cheap fifth wheel and a cheap sleeper. Cheap, but functional and working. I want a big sleeper. I want a shower and a toilet. So there you go. This is my truck. Thank you for watching. $225. I don't think I did bad.